Welcome to The Explainer. I'm going to level with you right out of the gate. Today, we are diving into a high-stakes masterclass in hazmat survival based on real-world EHS protocols. We're breaking down the exact regulations and safe handling practices you absolutely need to master if you want to keep your facility compliant and, more importantly, your people protected.
Listen to this. One misunderstood GHS label or one botched chemical spill response could cost your company millions in OSHA fines or worse, cost a life. Let that sink in for a second. Over the next 10 minutes, this explainer is going to be your ultimate survival guide. It's all about protecting your site, your workers, and honestly, your job. We're going deep into OSHA hazardous materials compliance, GHS labeling, and the critical difference between a perfectly controlled site and a catastrophic facility-ending shutdown.
Here is what we're looking at today. We'll kick things off with the true cost of hazards, then define toxic versus hazardous. From there, we'll decode GHS and SDS, untangle those messy regulatory frameworks, and wrap up with safe handling and emergency spill response.
All right, Section 1. The true cost of hazards.
We deal with an immense scale of chemicals every single day on the job, and the compliance risks are massive. It is so easy to get complacent, but complacency is exactly what leads to a disaster. Just think about this number for a minute. Over 500,000 products out there require safety data sheets. That is 500,000 potential points of failure if your hazard communication isn't completely locked down. And we aren't just talking about specialized glowing green laboratory chemicals here. Routine, everyday tasks, washing or fueling up a vehicle, applying pesticides, basic plumbing and carpentry, or even just using commercial cleaning disinfectants, they all expose your workers to severe health risks. The potential for chemical exposure on any given site is literally staggering.
Moving right along to Section 2, defining toxic versus hazardous.
Before we can manage a risk, we actually have to define it properly, and a crucial point here is that these two terms, they're not interchangeable. Toxicity is specifically the ability of a substance to produce an unwanted, harmful effect only when that chemical has reached a sufficient concentration at a specific site inside the body. A hazardous substance, on the other hand, is a much broader umbrella. It includes anything that creates an unusual health or safety risk simply through its use or storage. So a material can be highly toxic, but if it's stored perfectly and it never physically reaches the body, while the immediate hazard is actually controlled.
Notice how the physical form of a material completely changes its hazard profile. Toxic substances can be solids, liquids, gases, vapors, dusts, or mists. Let's take lead solder as an example. When it's just sitting on a workbench as a solid piece of wire, it's essentially safe, right? Because it can't easily enter your body. But if a worker rubs it with an abrasive file, suddenly it turns into an inhalable dust. And even worse, if you heat it up to a high temperature during brazing, it vaporizes into an extremely hazardous fume that gets easily inhaled and absorbed right into the bloodstream. The state of the material dictates the exact exposure control you need.
Section 3. Let's decode GHS and SDS. Controlling all these hazards requires a universal language. In the US, OSHA adopted GHS principles into its hazard communication standard. And this created a massive, fundamental philosophical shift. We moved from simply giving workers the right to know that chemicals are in the building to actually enforcing their right to understand. It is no longer acceptable to just hand a new guy a giant binder full of dense chemical jargon and call it a day. Safety standards now strictly mandate that every single worker comprehends the standardized labels, the signal words, and the pictograms on the materials they're actively handling.
And the absolute backbone of that understanding is the 16-section Safety Data Sheet, or the SDS. This standardized format is a total lifesaver. Sections 1 through 3, that tells you what the material is and what's in it. Sections 4 through 6 are your emergency playbook, first aid, and accidental release measures. Sections 7 and 8 dictate your daily safe handling and your required exposure controls, like what PPE to wear. And the remaining sections cover all the deep details: toxicology, disposal, and ecological impact. Now, if you are a site supervisor, you must ensure these sheets are instantly accessible to everyone in the work area at all times, no exceptions.
Check this out. See how GHS categorizes eye irritation and corrosion here? If a chemical is a Category 1 hazard, it triggers that severe danger signal word right alongside a graphic corrosion pictogram warning you about serious permanent eye damage. But if it's a Category 2 hazard, it only triggers a warning with an exclamation point, meaning it's an irritant rather than something that will cause permanent damage. As a worker, just glancing at that visual instantly tells you exactly how high the stakes are before you even touch the cap.
Section 4. Regulatory frameworks. We're looking at RCRA, CERCLA, DOT, and OSHA.
Now we are going to untangle this regulatory alphabet soup because it's absolutely critical to understand that different agencies care about very different things. The DOT is heavily focused on the safe and secure transportation of hazmat and commerce. Their worst nightmare is a sudden, uncontrolled release during transit. Think a truck rollover or a massive train derailment. OSHA, however, regulates the health of the workplace. So while both the DOT and OSHA care deeply about sudden explosions or a corrosive spill, only OSHA is regulating those quiet, long-term, chronic exposures to things like carcinogens and mutagens that harm your workers over decades.
Because these agencies have completely different goals, they classify things differently. Take a look at this comparison for flammable liquids. The DOT uses packing groups to dictate how strong a transport container needs to be, while GHS and OSHA use hazard categories to dictate workplace handling. Notice how slight, tiny variations in flash points drastically change your compliance requirements across the different agencies. You have to ensure you are meeting the right standard for the right activity, whether that chemical is sitting quietly on your shelf or riding in the back of a truck.
And when it comes to waste, we have RCRA and CERCLA working hand in hand, but really at opposite ends of the spectrum. RCRA is all about prevention. It applies to active facilities and mandates cradle-to-grave management of hazardous waste to stop contamination before it even starts. CERCLA, which is widely known as Superfund, is all about remediation. It steps in when a site is abandoned, uncontrolled, or already severely contaminated. Here's your big takeaway. If you fail to follow RCRA's active prevention rules today, your facility could easily become a massive CERCLA Superfund cleanup site tomorrow, bringing catastrophic financial liability right to your doorstep.
Section 5. Safe handling and storage.
Let's bring all these high-level regulations down to the daily reality of the shop floor. This is your daily defense. First off, you must store chemicals strictly by compatibility class. Never, ever just store them alphabetically. Next, physical controls literally save lives. Use sturdy shelves with protective lips so containers don't vibrate off the edge. Always place your larger, heavier containers closer to the floor. You need mandatory regular inspections for leaking containers. And always, always implement engineering controls like secondary containment trays and break-resistant bottle carriers. These are simple, physical steps that prevent devastating reactive chemical spills.
I really cannot emphasize this enough. Never mix incompatible products. When you've got leftovers remaining or waste is being consolidated at the end of a shift, casually mixing unclassified or incompatible chemicals can instantly turn a routine disposal into a toxic gas cloud or a literal explosion. It happens way too often. Always check the SDS conditions to avoid and keep those incompatibles separated both physically and operationally.
Finally, Section 6. Emergency spill response.
Look, even with absolutely perfect storage, incidents are going to occur. And when the worst-case scenario happens, you need an ironclad protocol. That protocol is OSHA 1910.120, the HAZWOPER standard. If you are cleaning up an uncontrolled hazardous waste site or responding to an emergency spill, these are your 5 pillars. First, a written safety and health plan. Second, strict role-specific training. This is where your 40-hour or 24-hour certifications come in. Third, medical surveillance to keep an eye on workers exposed above permissible limits. Fourth, strict decontamination procedures to make sure toxic materials aren't tracked into clean zones or worse, taken home. And fifth, a very clear emergency response plan detailing evacuation, reporting, and who is actually qualified to step foot into the hot zone.
But ultimately, the absolute best emergency spill response is a proactive defense. Before a cap is ever unscrewed, your work zones have to be clear. Reduce the clutter, eliminate all tripping hazards, because tripping while carrying a bucket of corrosive liquid is how fatalities happen. Have all your necessary equipment, including your spill kits and your PPE, ready and staged right there before work even begins. And finally, maintain constant situational awareness of how the specific chemical you are using can enter the human body, whether that's through inhalation, ingestion, or skin absorption.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to take back to your facility. Is your site truly compliant, or have you just been really lucky so far? Evaluate your own RCRA waste streams today. Check your OSHA HAZWOPER readiness, and make absolutely sure your team doesn't just know about GHS labels, but genuinely understands them. Because luck always runs out. Compliance saves lives.
Thanks for joining me for this critical breakdown.
If you found this guide valuable and you want to continue mastering your safety compliance, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to HSE Study for more high-impact safety insights. Stay safe out there, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.